Hi there, I'm Laura Lansrud-Lopez, and I want to thank everyone for being here. My dissertation is titled Layers of Paint, a Modified Artography Exploration into the Transformative Potential of Imaginal Knowing in Counseling Education. First, I want to thank my committee, Dr. Danielle Delorier, Dr. Leslie Jackson, and Dr. Lorraine Friedel. I also want to thank Dr. James Hollis, who served on the committee when I defended my proposal and who has given me invaluable feedback during my research and dissertation writing process. Finally, I want to thank my husband, Brian, my parents, Jean and Marcia Bolton, my 3 precious children, Sophia, Luciana, and Evan, my brother Phil, and my dear friends. Thank you all for your unconditional love, support, encouragement, and patience throughout this marathon process that began in 2014. In this presentation, I'll begin with my research question and sub-questions, my personal relationship to this inquiry. I'll describe the purpose and significance of my research, my modified narrative arts-based research methodology, review my findings, and talk about the limits of this research and ways my results might invite new inquiry in service to counseling education, ethical therapy practice, and the use of imaginal knowing for health, wellness, and self-expression in general. My primary research question is, what is the experience of transformation using imaginal knowing in counseling education? 3 sub-questions emerged. The first, in what ways might engagement with art making, such as symbol formation, visual creative expression, and the use of imagery promote imaginal knowing in a counseling education context? The second question is, how might licensed counselors, their clients, and the profession benefit from the growth and personal transformation a student might have experienced as a result of a transformative approach to learning during their graduate school training? And finally, how might students in a counseling education program that employs a transformative learning model define transformation? Because my inquiry is grounded in a post-colonial approach for qualitative arts-based research that embeds myself in the research as a co-participant, I'd like to offer some background about my positionality to this inquiry and my interest in the intersection of transformative learning theory, counseling education at the graduate level, and the wounded healer archetype, which, through this process, has expanded into the broader terrain of imaginal knowing as a pedagogical tool for transformative learning within counseling education in order to provide inclusive, equitable, and alternative pathways for counseling students who might otherwise be disenfranchised or silenced. Some relevant background about me. I'm a mental health counselor licensed in 3 states, a board-certified art therapist, and a nationally approved clinical supervisor. I've taught at the graduate level for over a decade and have been an administrative supervisor in higher education. I currently serve as vice chair of the New Mexico Counseling and Therapy Practice Board. I'm also an artist who has, since childhood, used art making as a way to express myself and cope with challenges. And like many students, I was drawn to the field of counseling with the hope that I might help others, but carrying with me limiting beliefs about myself, biases, and unresolved past wounds. I was fortunate to find a school using a transformative approach to teaching that integrated art making among other experiential, reflective, and imaginal techniques. In particular, the 10-week mandala art making process used in a core curriculum course called Archetypal Psychology, which is a required course in my program, was difficult and created for me what Jack Mezirow called a disorienting dilemma. Mezirow describes this as a structural change in the way we see ourselves and our relationships, and is often disorienting, uncomfortable, or even painful. The combination of art making, reflection, and discussion within the context of my classroom learning in community and environment led me to identify, confront, and deconstruct prior beliefs I held about my culture, my identity, my childhood, and my reason for even wanting to become a therapist. My disruption was very painful, and many relationships suffered, especially my relationship with my mother. She didn't understand the new boundaries I set and felt hurt by my efforts to opt out of the familiar, yet sometimes dysfunctional, established patterns of interacting within my family system. Yet, by continuing to stay with the image, as suggested by art therapy pioneer Edith Kramer, which is grounded in the work of Carl Jung, I continued to make art, share with my classmates, and ultimately experienced something I can only describe as transformative. Before this course, I couldn't have created this image. I'd never had an awareness of myself as whole. My prior belief was that I was broken, wounded, and flawed. When this image emerged as part of my culminating project, I realized I was both broken and whole, wounded and unharmed, flawed and perfect. This both and expansion of knowing isn't something a counseling student can be taught didactically. It has to be experienced. What's more, this image has continued to speak to me over the years. Through births, deaths, transitions, and new endeavors, it whispers to me of potential, divinity, and expansiveness. This awareness set me on my path to become a licensed therapist, educator, and leader in my field, and has remained essential in my work with clients, supervisees, and students who are in pain or having their own disorienting dilemmas. I wondered what others had experienced in this course. What was their experience of the art-making process, and how might it have informed their current work as therapists? This constellation of experiences made me very aware of the importance of graduate counseling education for helping students to cultivate a habit of self-reflection, a tolerance for sitting with difficult emotions, their own and others, expressing oneself effectively, authentically, and with compassion, and identifying their own patterns of thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors. There is abundant literature about the link between past trauma and psychological wounds, and those who choose an occupation in a healing field such as nursing, social work, counseling, and psychology. And while we can understand the drive to pursue a healing profession, if we ourselves have experienced adversity, struggle, loss, pain, and grief, it can also create harm if those wounds remain hidden, unconscious, unaddressed, or shrouded in secrecy. As Jung suggests, half of any treatment consists of the healer examining their own psychological wound. What is needed in this field are those who can discern between woundedness and professional impairment, and those who might have wounds but consciously engage with the necessary intrapsychic and relational work required to be of service and provide a healing presence for others in pain. And now that I've been an educator and administrator in a graduate counseling program for over a decade, I'm concerned by the national trend of a one-size-fits-all, competence-based approach in counseling education. This approach assesses students for their ability to demonstrate specific counseling skills and knowledge throughout the program, yet does not address a student's wholeness, psychospiritual wellness, nor capacity for non-academic self-assessment. In other words, academic success through a traditional didactic model of teaching is an insufficient measure of competence to provide ethical and effective compassionate therapy to clients from diverse backgrounds and different frames of reference and experiences. Nor does it prepare students to face their own unconscious content or shadows that will inevitably emerge in this work. It's also endorsed by accrediting bodies such as the Council for Accreditation of Counseling and Related Educational Programs, or CACREP, and the Commission on Accreditation of Allied Health Education Programs, or CAHEP, who oversee the accreditation of art therapy programs, which is called ACATE. These regulating organizations establish criteria for education and licensing, and they aspire for universal standards across the United States. Large professional organizations such as the American Counseling Association, or ACA, and the National Board for Certified Counselors, or NBCC, joined forces in 2010 to compel state licensing boards to accept only CACREP standards. Their vision was to unify the field and pave the way for reciprocity in licensing across state lines. However, these standards are arduous and financially burdensome on small or rural schools. They also ignore the culture, population, needs of the community being served, and the educational philosophy of the schools seeking accreditation. This concern has informed and driven my inquiry, and although I'm also an art therapist, I focused my research on counseling education because I believe these programs are uniquely poised to benefit from this research. I'd like to say a few things about the purpose and significance of this research from a transdisciplinary context. The traditional practice of learning and teaching from within a discipline that is siloed from other disciplines is evolving into what Gidley refers to as post-formal pedagogies. These include aesthetic and artistic education, complexity in education, critical and post-colonial thought, holistic approaches, and imagination and creativity in education. Integral and transdisciplinarity literature calls for these new approaches in education to address increasing complexities of our modern times. And this is especially true in counseling education, which endeavors to prepare people for intensely interactive, dynamic, and culturally competent work with individuals and constellations of people struggling with a wide array of symptoms, and who hold their own culturally informed and transgenerational definitions of growth, recovery, and healing. Many students come to counseling programs with histories of trauma, adverse life experiences, and varying degrees of wounding. The literature in nursing, social work, and psychotherapy shows that personal wounding, troubled family of origins, and students' reactive responses are commonly found among professional caregivers. This phenomenon is associated with the wounded healer archetype, and it suggests that the healer's own wounds can carry curative power for the client, and is also aligned with the theory of post-traumatic growth. However, many traditional clinical counseling programs attach negative stigma to students who reveal their wounding or vulnerability within academic settings. And the trend for rigid gatekeeping responses can inadvertently propagate a conspiracy of silence, that this might encourage student non-disclosure, inauthenticity, or compartmentalization of uncomfortable emotions. Should a student who is enrolled in a program that employs such a conservative gatekeeping practice demonstrate disruption, such as might be observed in Mesro's disorienting dilemma, that student could be flagged as needing remediation or disciplinary action. Remediation plans might require the student to meet with faculty more often, meet with a school counselor or mentor, or attend personal therapy. Recent literature about culturally responsive gatekeeping recommend that impaired students be assigned extra work to focus on the topic of concern. They might be required to take additional academic classes, such as ethics. They might be assigned out-of-class experiences, or such as cultural immersion activities, or they could be scheduled additional supervision. And disciplinary actions range from probation to suspension or expulsion. Left in isolation, shrouded by stigma, and bound to the conspiracy of silence, past wounds can be left unresolved and lead to harmful countertransference, therapist burnout, or vicarious trauma and ethical problems that cause harm once the student has graduated and been licensed. According to the Healthcare Providers Service Organization, one of the largest providers for professional liability insurance in the United States, The most common and highly paid out claim is for boundary violations, including sexual misconduct and inappropriate self-disclosure. The New Mexico Therapy and Counseling Practice Board, for whom I chair the Ethics and Complaints Committee, sees the highest number of complaints for boundary violations that include behaviors in which the client is put in the position of meeting the unmet needs of the therapist. In such cases, therapists face consequences ranging from mandatory board-approved supervision or therapy to fines, suspension, or revocation of their license, and might even face criminal charges. I posit that a student's past wounds, when left hidden and unresolved, may negatively affect their future clinical practice. Thus, the pedagogical interventions used early in counseling education, specifically transformative learning approaches that create an environment of safety and trust, support integration and self-awareness, and encourage authenticity, might greatly influence whether a student with a history of wounding becomes a wounded healer or an impaired professional. Furthermore, I propose that not only those students with past wounds, but also students with current or ongoing adversity, marginalization, or underrepresentation might also benefit from an approach that views transformative learning as a journey of soul that invites alternative and imaginal ways of knowing within the curriculum. The literature underpinning my research comes from counseling education, transformative learning theory, especially contemporary adaptations that incorporate extra-rational, emotional, and spiritual dimensions of learning, and imaginal knowing, which branches in many directions, with roots to ancient folklore, myth, legend, scripture, art, visions, and shamanism. In this research, imaginal knowing is the use of visual image, including active imagination, and image making with digital or physical materials along the expressive arts continuum in order to gain new knowledge, enhance self-awareness, and deepen our relationship with ourselves, the living cosmos, and attend to the dynamic interconnection between so-called inner and outer experiences. James Hillman, the pioneer of archetypal psychology, put it this way: all consciousness depends on these images. Everything else, ideas of the mind, sensations of the body, perceptions of the world around us, beliefs, feelings, hungers, must present themselves as images in order to become experienced. He asserts, in the beginning is the image, first imagination, then perception, first fantasy, then reality. My research strategy was multi-layered, interconnected, and dynamic. I used a combination of narrative research and arts-based research, specifically artography, to most effectively explore and convey the richness and complexity of the lived experience of my participants through the lens of participatory engagement. By using this innovative approach, I was able to work with my participants in a manner that held transformative potential for them and for me, and revision transformative learning as a creative process ripe with potential to facilitate the integration of one's past experiences, build resilience, and promote the quality of inner work that is essential for ethical and effective therapy practice. Narrative inquiry seeks to illuminate the two sides of a lived experience, telling and knowing, and as a research approach, offers a complex and intimate insight into the feelings, goals, perceptions, and values of the people we hope to understand, while also conveying the values that can be generalized. Narrative inquiry plays with the polarities of uniqueness and universality, creativity and discipline, and positionality and scholarship. The nonlinear dialectic process of narrative research demands a both-and explorative approach, and in many ways mirrors the change process seen in transformative education. And as a therapist, I am deeply interested in the thick description of people's lived experience. As Sandra Weber and Claudia Mitchell describe, it is through artistic images that we can access elusive aspects of knowing that might otherwise remain hidden or ignored. In arts-based research, the art and the art-making process can be used at all stages of the research. Thus, it can be seen as a continuum or spectrum. At one end, there is an arts-based approach that intertwines art-making and research. And on the other end is arts-informed research that looks at and analyzes participant-created artwork. According to Sean McNiff, the distinguishing feature of arts-based research is that researchers actively participate in creating art as a central method of investigation and discovery. He continues, that as art is infinitely variable, it follows that a fundamental premise of visual arts-based inquiry is that the end cannot be known at the beginning. And as Lynn Capitan writes in describing how art can be viewed as a symbolic language, the outcomes of visual arts-based research are grounded neither in the mathematical language of quantitative research nor in the words of qualitative research, but in symbolic language and forms. As indicated in my dissertation title, the arts-based research method I used is a modified artography. The reason for designating this method with an A/R/T is, according to Rita Irwin, the pioneer of artography, it's a metaphor about the co-equal roles of artist, researcher, and teacher. Artography, as a practice and methodology, integrates these three roles and creates what she calls third spaces, where openings between artist, researcher, and teacher can exist, and where knowing, doing, and making coalesce. One result of my arts-based research pilot study from 2019, which was presented at a conference at CIIS but is unpublished, was the emergence of a fourth identity, that of therapist. My style of interacting with my participants, the lens through which I made sense of what was happening during the interviews, how I made moment-to-moment ethical decisions about their well-being and vulnerability while they shared deeply moving personal stories, and how I talked with them about their artwork was driven by my training and experience as a therapist. While learning to become a researcher, I had circled back to myself as therapist. And my committee chair, Dr. Delorier, noticed this first and coined the term artography with the extra T to better describe my modified methodology. Of artography, Irwin says, it is an act of interdisciplinarity that hyphenates, bridges, slashes, and creates other forms of thirdness that provide the space for exploration, translation, and understanding in deeper and more enhanced ways of meaning-making. In my experience, the inclusion of the fourth identity therapist expands these possibilities and is written in text with the capital T to highlight this unique modification from the well-established artography body of literature. I included 10 participants who were selected based on the following criteria. They had completed the archetypal psychology course at Southwestern College. They consented to participate in a recorded interview, and they consented to share and discuss the artwork they created during their course and any other related artwork made while they were students. Current supervisees and students were excluded. I used word of mouth, direct invitations, social media announcements, and snowball sampling to invite participants who might have different perspectives on this course and who might represent diverse backgrounds, including ethnicity, culture, sex and gender identity, and year of course completion. Participant familiarity with art making was not a requirement. No one was excluded for voicing criticism of the course, the school, a specific instructor, or the art-making requirement in general. All participants were licensed therapists in the United States. Each participant was sent information about my research methodology and the list of questions. They were also provided a copy of my informed consent to participate, which we reviewed again at the outset of each recorded interview. Each interview lasted about an hour. Written transcripts of the interviews were reviewed to verify accuracy, and participants were invited to read their transcripts in order to make corrections, edits, or clarify anything that might have been misspoken or misunderstood. This process of co-participation in the research was essential to add validity to my findings. I coded the themes that emerged from the transcripts before engaging in my one canvas art-making process as an additional research text. The primary research text and arts-based research mode of presentation at the heart of this research is my one canvas painting process. In a one canvas process, the artist employs visual art making as an avenue for response and reflection in which the artist paints on the same canvas several times, thus creating layers of images. This technique was made popular by Abby Miller for helping therapy interns express in aesthetic form the emotions and sensations that arise within them in response to their clients and the therapist-client dynamic. By layering paint on one canvas over time, Miller says that the artist invites archetypal, metaphoric, and symbolic imagery that bring new awareness and understanding of oneself, the client, and the relationship. The process is not intended to mimic participant images nor illustrate their narrative, but rather to use my own art making and imaginal knowing as a response and research text, and to deepen my multisensory experience of their images and their narratives. In my one canvas painting process, I visually respond with paint on a 24 by 24 inch canvas to what I heard during the interviews. The themes, emotional content, words being spoken, and my own imaginal knowing, while also keeping the momentum of a continuous experiential process of painting over and over on the same canvas. This painting process forms a visual gestalt, which is why the full video of this process, including the narrative portions inspiring each image, is a core research text and mode of presentation. I painted for approximately 70 hours over 7 days. Although my painting process was continuous, I did pause often to take photos of the canvas, make notes when I had a new awareness, made a new connection, or became aware of new emergent themes. At times, however, the imagery swept me along, and it took effort to pendulate between the flow of creative expression and taking notes on observations and themes. This process, as a transdisciplinary whole, can be framed within a hermeneutic of creation. The hermeneutics of creation, designed to offer a transdisciplinary framework for understanding, interpreting, and making meaning of the dream experience, arguably applies to the reflective, responsive, and spontaneous one canvas painting process used in this research. Due to time constraints, I'm only going to share the 3-minute video of my one canvas painting process without narration. And in the spirit of arts-based research, I invite you to track your own response to the images as they emerge.
Deep down in the depths of forgotten dreams, so far away, so long ago, it seems. The memory comes of a distant beach, pale sand stretching far from reach. It was then I found my princess. It was then I found. As I traced the foam with a pebble, as I traced beneath my feet, I looked behind and I saw this one so sweet. She came to me and I saw in her eyes the heavy toll of 1,000 sighs. I called her my princess of the sand. She stared at me and my mind was in a maze. As we moved along in a summer sea dream haze, she moved her mouth but there came no sound. The message she brought can never be found. But I called her my princess of the sand. One moment we walked with the night breeze in our face. Then I looked, she'd gone, of her presence there was no trace. Where she went or came from, who can know, or if she'll ever return to help me know who she is, my princess of the sand. Sometime when the summer nights come back, I'll go back to the sea and I'll follow that sandy track. I'll look around and I'll hope to find that strange young dream close behind. I'll call her my princess of the sand.
Before I share my findings, I want to be clear about my research method for context and explain how my orthography methodology, with the extra T to indicate my intersecting identity as therapist, incorporates experiential and imaginal knowing. The multiple layers of research texts foundational to my research can be viewed as occupying two basic zones, the zone of theoretical and the zone of practical. Within the theoretical zone is how I understand and make sense of the original texts. In this case, participant artwork and its therapeutic relevance, which is informed by my therapist identity and aligns with the hermeneutics of creation. In other words, my engagement with the original texts can be thought of as inspired, spontaneous, intuitive, and aligned with imaginal knowing, and supported by my therapist identity. In the practical zone, I'm reading original texts through the lens of educational praxis and their relevance to pedagogy, and contemplating how this research might inform changes in counseling education. This zone can be thought of as occupying a hermeneutics of discovery and is bound to the raw data obtained. When I look at the original texts, I engage in my one canvas art making process, which can be conceptualized as a primary research text within the theoretical zone and demonstrates therapeutic meaning making within the hermeneutics of creation. My one canvas process also served as a mode of analysis with this research. The participants responded in writing and with artwork to my one canvas process, which was shared with them as a video presentation, and this further informed my findings. In the practical zone, I engaged in in-depth thematic analysis of the interviews, identified narrative themes, and incorporated the responses from all 10 participants in my findings. The three modes of presentation used in this narrative arts-based research are my one canvas process video that includes all 10 participant narratives and which correspond to my art process, and the 5 narrative vignettes included within my written dissertation and are offered to reduce redundancy and exemplify diverse paths of personal transformation within an educational setting centering on imaginal knowing. And lastly, my thematic summary of findings, which hold general relevance, which I will now share. Within the parameter of my research design, my findings revealed 3 phases that can be associated with specific symbolic elements. The first phase described feeling disoriented, lost, or out of place in the transformative learning terrain. At times, participants recalled feeling resistant, irritated, or confused by the transformative learning pedagogy that incorporated art making as an avenue for self-reflection. Some participants shared negative opinions of the instructor or criticism that the course was irrelevant to their training as future licensed counselors. At other times, participants described feeling worried about how their images might be viewed, judged, or assessed by faculty holding gatekeeping roles for professional and academic fitness. The next phase was represented by a decision point and choice to engage in the requirements of the curriculum. For some participants, this decision was described as surrender, acceptance, or willingness. Across narratives, this phase held qualities of wandering, exploring, curiosity, and sometimes feeling lost in the murkiness of things that do not yet make sense. During this phase of exploration, participants highlighted the importance and value of a safe and supportive learning environment. For some, this was provided through positive rapport with classmates. For others, the need for safety was found through attuned connection with their course instructor or another member of the faculty, such as an academic advisor or program chair. The third phase could be described as feelings of coming home to oneself. This phase, which often accompanied attributes of reclaiming symbols that had previously held different meanings, associations, or been subjected to negative connotations, was described as infused with greater authenticity, purpose, empowerment, and alignment with one's true or core self. Given the complex narrative arts-based methodology I just explained, and within the parameter of my research design, here's a summary of my findings. When my participants looked with me at the artwork they made years ago, sometimes decades ago, they expressed having new insights, made new connections, noticed new symbols, and found deeper meaning in their images. In short, the art continued to speak to us. Participants described the art-making process that was used within this course as novel, sometimes confusing, and for some, an out-of-comfort-zone experience as a graduate counseling student. Yet, when allowing themselves to engage with the process, it was described as an avenue for self-awareness and, in all cases within this research, provided meaningful personal growth that might not have been attained without the art-making. This was consistent regardless of the participant's opinion of the course or the teacher or the school, and was not correlated with familiarity nor comfort with art materials or art making. Another theme was the importance of a supportive learning environment for personal growth. Participants expressed the importance of having their artwork witnessed without it being judged, critiqued, or assessed. Some participants described feeling worried that their artwork might be used as a measure of their professional fitness, yet experienced expansiveness and some degree of liberation when their creative expression was held with curiosity and validation. For most participants, this group cohesion within the student cohort provided the safe and supportive container for growth. A few participants found this support through connection with a particular faculty member or advisor. The overwhelming feedback I received from the people who participated in this research was that they experienced a validating attunement from the interview and with me, and described the experience as therapeutic, meaningful, inspiring, and positive. All participants said that I was accurate in how I portrayed their narratives, and several were deeply moved by listening to their own words spoken back to them while watching the evolution of my one canvas process. The combination of the interview, reading their transcripts, watching the presentation, and engaging in response art facilitated what was described by one participant as a deeper integration of their graduate school experience. As Ginger wrote in her email to me, "You synthesized a lot of disjointed information in such a clear way. I actually got to cry, that deep, wordless, powerful sobbing that comes from the connection and being seen. Thank you for that gift." And finally, the experience of transformation through imaginal knowing is fluid, dynamic, and ever-evolving. This theme, which initially emerged in my 2019 pilot study, became more apparent in this research. Not only was it apparent visually in the artwork created by my participants and their narratives, but it also emerged physically and symbolically in my one canvas process. The one canvas painting process evokes an emotional journey of tension, resolution, and release that cycles with ever-deepening meaning. It asks us to be present to the moment while simultaneously holding our past and making decisions about the next step. Similar to the lived experience. As one participant said, the ever-evolving nature of life is transformation. This inquiry is fundamentally based on the phenomenon that the unconscious is inclined to reveal itself through channels such as the use of symbol, image, and creative and expressive arts. Expressive arts often bypass the self-censorship of ego consciousness to embody and reveal significant intrapsychic dynamics, including the experience of transformation. And as James Hillman said, the gift of an image is that it provides a place to watch your soul. This research demonstrates the value of imaginal knowing and image formation for understanding of self and others in an educational context first, with the ulterior aim that this would prepare students to become skillful therapists. It also asserts its value for qualitative and arts-based research.